There is something deeply uncomfortable about the person you used to be, not because they were bad, not because they made terrible choices, but because somewhere inside you, you already knew they were living a life built around avoiding something, and that something was pain. You spent years constructing a version of yourself that could function, that could smile at the right moments, say the right things, show up in ways that kept everything stable. But stable is not the same as real. And somewhere beneath all of that careful management, beneath all those practiced responses and quiet sacrifices, something in you was waiting for the moment when the weight of pretending became heavier than the fear of falling apart. That moment is not a breakdown. It is a beginning. And if you are watching this, there is a chance you have already felt it, or you are standing right at its edge. If this channel speaks to something in you, consider subscribing. What we explore here is not self-help, it is self-truth. Most people think transformation is supposed to feel like growth, like a steady climb, like waking up one day with more clarity, more strength, more direction. But that is not what real transformation feels like. Real transformation begins with a collapse of something you were convinced you needed: a relationship, an identity, a belief about who you are, a future you had already imagined in detail. And when that thing dissolves, when it cracks or disappears or simply stops working, the pain that rushes in feels less like an invitation and more like punishment. This is the first psychological trigger most people never recognize in themselves. The mind, when faced with loss, immediately searches for a reason, someone to blame, a mistake to trace back, a logic that explains why this had to happen, because pain without meaning is unbearable. And so the brain invents meaning, often the wrong kind. It tells you that you failed, that you chose wrong, that you should have known better. And in that loop of self-accusation, the real message of the pain gets buried. Because pain, at its deepest level, is not punishment. It is information. Carl Jung spent his life studying what happens when people refuse to receive that information. He called it the shadow, that hidden part of the self that carries everything the conscious mind has rejected. The fears you never admitted, the desires you suppressed, the grief you performed but never actually felt, the anger you swallowed to keep the peace. And the shadow does not disappear simply because you ignore it. It grows. It moves. It starts to speak through your choices, your reactions, your relationships, in ways you don't understand until the damage is already done. Pain is often the shadow finally getting loud enough to hear. Think about the last time something hurt you in a way that stayed with you. Not the surface hurt, not the frustration of a bad day. The kind of hurt that lingered, that returned at night, that made you stare at nothing and feel the full weight of something you couldn't name. Ask yourself honestly, what was underneath it? Not what caused it, what it was pointing to. Because beneath every deep wound, there is a truth the person was not yet ready to carry. Maybe the relationship ended, and the pain was not just about losing that person. It was about realizing how much of yourself you had disappeared into them. How much you had given without knowing you were giving it. How your sense of self had quietly become dependent on the reflection of you. Maybe the failure you experienced was not just a setback. It was the moment your identity, the story you told yourself about who you were and what you were capable of, was suddenly thrown into question. And without that story, you didn't know how to stand. This is what psychologists call an identity crisis. But that phrase makes it sound clinical, removed, like something that happens to other people. What it actually feels like is the ground disappearing. It feels like waking up in a room you have lived in for years and suddenly not recognizing any of the furniture. And here's what almost no one tells you about that moment. It is the most important moment of your life, because here is the hidden psychological truth about pain and transformation. The self you built before the collapse was always, in some way, a coping structure, not a true identity, a mechanism. A collection of behaviors and beliefs assembled in response to what the world told you you needed to be. Psychologists call this the persona, the mask we construct to navigate social reality. And for many people, that mask becomes so comfortable, so familiar, so deeply worn, that they forget it is a mask at all. They begin to believe they are the version of themselves that others approve of, the high achiever, the caretaker, the one who never needs anything, the one who always has it together. And they pour enormous energy into maintaining that image, not because it makes them happy, but because the thought of losing it is terrifying. Because beneath the persona, they don't know who they are. Pain strips the persona away, not gently, not on your timeline, but with a kind of brutal precision that, if you survive it, begins to feel like grace. The people who come through real pain with something more than scars, they share one thing in common. They did not try to reassemble the old self as quickly as possible. They sat in the discomfort long enough to ask a question most people run from. If the person I was built around avoiding this pain, then who am I without that avoidance? That question is the beginning of everything. There is a pattern in human behavior that is almost universal, and it is one of the most quietly destructive forces in a person's inner life. It is the habit of returning to familiarity even when familiarity is painful. Psychologists call it repetition compulsion. It is the reason people leave one relationship and fall into the same dynamic with a different person. The reason they escape one environment and unconsciously recreate the same emotional atmosphere somewhere new. The reason the same argument finds them no matter where they go. It is not stupidity. It is not weakness. It is the nervous system doing what it was trained to do, seeking the emotional conditions it grew up recognizing as normal, even when those conditions were never safe, even when they were never enough. And the painful part, the part that most self-awareness conversations skip, is that you cannot think your way out of this pattern. You cannot simply understand it and watch it dissolve because it lives below the level of thought. It lives in the body, in the gut, in the instant reaction before the mind has time to catch up. The only way through it is to feel the pain it has been producing, trace it back to its source, and slowly over time, make a different choice. Not from fear, from clarity. That is the work. And it is hard work, and it does not have a clean ending. But something changes when you begin it. Something subtle but permanent. You start to notice the pattern before it completes. You start to feel the pull toward the familiar and recognize it for what it is. Not a signal that you belong there, but a signal that something old is still asking to be healed. That recognition, quiet as it is transformation happening in real time. What do you carry that you were never given permission to put down? Drop that in the comments. You might be surprised how many people are holding the same thing. Here's what transformation actually is. Stripped of every inspirational distortion. It is not the moment you become stronger. It is the moment you stop pretending you were never afraid. It is the moment you stop performing wholeness and start actually building it slowly, imperfectly, without applause. It is the moment you look at the person. You have been the one who over-explained, who shrank, who overgave, who performed confidence while quietly disintegrating, and instead of judging them, you finally understand them. Because that person was doing the best they could with the tools they had. They were surviving inside conditions they didn't choose. And the fact that you can see them now, really see them, with clarity instead of shame, means you have already moved beyond them. Jung believed that the meeting of the shadow was not a destruction of the self, but a completion of it. That when you finally face the parts of yourself, you buried the grief, the rage, the need, the fear. They don't consume you. They integrate. They become part of a fuller, more honest version of who you are. A person who no longer needs to perform, who no longer needs the world's approval to feel real, who can sit in discomfort without running because they have already survived the worst version of it. That is not invulnerability. That is depth. The most painful seasons of your life were not interruptions to your story. They were the story. They were the chapters where you were being asked to grow beyond the self you had outgrown before you even knew it was possible to grow that far. You have been trying to understand why certain things broke you the way they did. And the answer is not that you were too weak. The answer is that something in you was finally strong enough to stop pretending those things didn't need to break. Pain does not visit the people who have nothing to become. It visits the ones who are ready, even when they don't feel ready to become something more honest than what they have been. You are not at the beginning of your suffering. You are at the beginning of your truth. And those two things, for a time, feel exactly the same.